Hello everyone and welcome to Changeling Gaming. Today I'm going to be teaching you how to play Evolution Climate. Evolution Climate is a level 3 play-to-learn game designed by Dominik Krapuchets, Dmitry Nor, and Sergei Machin, and published by North Star Games for 2 to 6 players that can take on average 45 minutes to an hour and a half to play. In Evolution Climate, we will craft our own species and ecosystems, providing them with various adaptations and traits to try and create the most efficiently adapted species to the current and ever-changing climate that will challenge their means of survival. Setup. Pull out and assemble the climate board, assembling it on the appropriate side determined by the number of players sitting at the table. Pull out the climate marker and place it in the center location named Temperate. Shuffle the hot and cold event decks and place them on top of the portion of the board where the art aligns. Draw the top card from each deck and place them in the climate spaces noted at the bottom of each card. Pull out the species boards and the brown and green body size and population cubes and place them nearby. Pass out one of each to each player and place the green cube in the first space on the population track and the brown cube on the first space on the body size track. Both sides of the board are similar, just vertical versus horizontal. Pull out the bag of food tokens and set it nearby. Let every player choose a food bag that they can store their gathered food tokens in. Remove a number of cards from the main deck based on the number of players involved. Remove half the deck if there are 2 players, 60 cards if there are 3 players, 30 cards if there are 4 players, and no cards if there are 5 or 6 players. You'll play with the full deck. Also be sure to pull out these reference cards with the turn order on one side and the trait cards listed inside. The first player dinosaur is given to a random player. How to play. Every round goes through the same series of steps. First, deal every player a number of cards equal to 4 plus the number of species they have. If a player has no species, then give them a new board with a body size and population of 1 before dealing out cards so they still receive a minimum of 5 cards. Next, every player needs to decide which card they want to set in the center to determine the available food supply and the direction of the climate in the coming phase of the game. The portion of the card that determines this effect is present on the bottom right of each card. There are 2 relevant pieces. There will be either a series of suns, snowflakes, or neither atop a number within a plant leaf. The number of suns and snowflakes determines the likelihood of the climate moving towards a warmer climate or a colder climate, while the number below will help determine how much food will be available in the watering hole for that round. Once the climate/food card has been chosen, players can begin to plan what they're going to do with the rest of their cards and species boards. Either in order clockwise, starting with the first player, or simultaneously if the group wants to play the game a bit quicker, players can begin improving their species, either in raw stats, or with trait cards and or gaining new species. To gain a new species, a player must discard one of the cards in their hand, at which point they receive a new species board with a body mass cube and population cube in the first slot of their respective tracks. This new species must be placed to either side of the species that player currently controls, never in between. To increase either the body mass or the population size of a species, a player must similarly discard 1 card per slot they want to increase for either track. To add a trait to a species, a player must simply place the chosen trait cards face down for now. Players can replace old traits whenever they want, because in a 2-player game there is a limit of 3 traits for a species, and in any other player count there is a limit of 4 traits. Players can also remove traits whenever they want if they feel those traits are no longer beneficial. A few things to know about these traits. A species cannot have duplicates of any traits. In addition, there are some elements to help identify the purpose of a card. Notably, the color of the card background indicates what types of effects these traits are useful for. For instance, cards with a green background are beneficial towards herbivores trying to feed. Red backgrounds are useful traits for carnivores, blue traits help in dealing with climate effects, gray traits are defensive traits, and yellow traits are none of the above. Cards that have multiple colors have effects for multiple situations. There are more details on these traits in the rulebook from pages 12 to 17. Players can also discard as many cards as they want at the end of their turn to draw that many cards. The discarded cards are placed at the bottom of the draw deck. Once every player has taken their turn to upgrade and or add species, reveal the new traits that have been played so everyone knows how the species present have evolved. Note that players do not have to spend all their cards, and certain traits like intelligence require the species being able to discard a card from the player's hand. Before continuing, be sure to apply any effects from species traits that come into play at this moment, like fertile adding a population if there's any food left over from the previous round in the watering hole, or long neck letting a creature grab a plant food from the food bag. Next, it is time to determine the climate progression and the food present in the watering hole. To determine this, reveal the cards set in the center, and count up the number of suns and snowflakes. If there are more suns, then move the climate marker a single space towards the warmer half of the climate board. While if there are more snowflakes, then move the marker a single space towards the colder half of the climate board. If there is a tie, then the climate marker does not move. If the climate marker moves to a space with an event card, then that card is resolved immediately, which in the case of cold snaps and heat waves will override the usual effects, but otherwise these events have one-time or ongoing effects. For more details or clarification, check out pages 18 and 19 in the rulebook. Check the climate location to identify if there are any species that should lose population due to the heat or cold. In the climate space where the marker is present, if there are suns or snowflakes, then there is a chance some species might lose population. The number of suns or snowflakes determines how much of the population will die without adaptation to prevent it, and the number of values determine the body size of the creatures affected. So the further along the climate tracks the climate moves, the more creatures will be affected, and the more that will perish. Climate traits that have a matching symbol reduce the population loss for any climate-related effects by that amount, and are cumulative across the different trait cards for a species. So heavy fur reduces population loss from cold by 4, while burrowing reduces population loss from heat by 1. Now, to determine the food available in the watering hole, add up the values at the bottom of all the cards put in the center by the players, and include the value in the climate location where the climate marker is present. Remember that if this includes a cold or warm climate special card that has its own food traits, then that overrides the climate location. Note that it is always possible to remove food from the watering hole. Once the watering hole is updated, if an event card was drawn, replace it with a card for the next round. Now it is time for the first player to feed one of their species. If they have an herbivore, they can take food from the watering hole in the center. And if they have a carnivore, they can instead choose to eat any of the other species at the table that they are able to. The main means a predator uses to choose its prey is having a larger body size to the species they want to eat. Though cards like Pack Tactics can give carnivores a different means of being able to devour other species. The carnivore gains a number of food tokens from the food bag that is equivalent to the body size of the species that was eaten, and the species that was eaten also loses 1 population size. Note that a carnivore can only attack as long as it is hungry, or has the option to fill up a card like Fat Tissue. Don't forget to trigger any additional effects present amongst your trait cards, such as Cooperation and Scavenger, that allow additional species to feed depending on who ate and what. So Cooperation means that multiple herbivores can take plant food from the watering hole if set up correctly, while Scavenger is a card that can trigger on anybody's feeding turn. Do also note that a carnivore is unable to eat plant food under any circumstances. Once the first player has taken the feed action for one of their species, it is the turn of the next player clockwise to take the feed action for one of their species, then the next player clockwise from there, and so on and so forth. Play continues around for as long as it is possible for a species to eat, and as long as those species are still hungry. Hunger is determined by whether there is a gap between the food placed on the species board and the population size for that species. A carnivore that is still hungry will still eat as long as it is able, even if that means attacking a creature with horns and losing a population to do so. Once there is no more feeding to be done, apply any last benefits for the end of the round, such as with Migratory, where that species can take up to 2 food from the food bag. Once these last traits are applied, if any species are still hungry, then they starve down to the amount of food they were able to eat, unless they have a trait like Hibernation, which reduces possible starvation losses. If a species goes extinct, then their species board and all their trait cards are discarded, with the player who controlled that species getting to draw a number of cards equal to the number of trait cards that were present on the species at the time of its extinction to help with rebuilding. Players take all the food on their species boards and place them in their personal food bags at the end of the round. The first player dinosaur is passed clockwise 1 space, and the next round begins. The last cards from the deck being dealt out herald the final round of the game, but use either the removed cards or a reshuffled discard pile to ensure every player has the correct number of cards for the number of species they control for the final round. Once this final round is complete, it's time to move on to scoring. Scoring. To score, count up the number of food tokens players have in their bags, as well as any food tokens left on cards, like fat tissue. Players also gain a point for every slot of population size they have across their species, and an additional point for every trait present on one of their species. Players tally up all of their points, and whoever has the most points wins. Ties are broken in favor of whoever has more population amongst their species. So go out and guide the evolution of the species under your care, such that they can survive and thrive through any and all future climate challenges they will have to engage with over the course of centuries of life and evolution. Be sure to support your local game stores. For us, that is Board Game To Go, who offer over 2,000 games for rental within the Toronto area and many games for purchase. Check out the link to this game in the description below. If you have any questions about the game, feel free to post them in the comments below. Or take a look to see if someone else has already answered it down there, and be sure to thank them if they have. If you want to learn more about what a ranking system means, check out this video here. And if you want to learn how to play more games, check out our playlist here. And remember, keep changing, keep gaming, have fun.